Hi, this is Jen Rubin, and this is Jen Rubin's Green Room. So glad to have you back. And remember, if you enjoy these programs, please tell your friends. They can click right there, subscribe, follow at YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever they get their podcasts. The end of another busy week. First, let's talk about the Trump trial. On one hand, you can say this is a fabulous confirmation that the rule of law works. Like any defendant, he had to sit there in court. They chose a jury. They got 12 jurors in a very short period of time. You should appreciate that in many of these cases, particularly high-profile cases, it takes weeks to get jurors. And they got 12, plus they are now working their way through the alternates. So on one hand, you can say Donald Trump is finally learning that he doesn't get special privileges. He has to sit there. 12 ordinary people who are not his fans are going to determine his fate. On the other hand, Donald Trump is behaving like no defendant would be allowed to behave. First of all, he is using social media to threaten witnesses, to threaten the jury by saying that they're all a bunch of liberal plugs. That's a way of impugning them, threatening some kind of retribution from his minions should they decide the wrong way. He even growled and made some gesture at a witness who was dismissed in court. This is outrageous. Not to mention, of course, that he uses the courtroom steps to impugn the entire court process. He is going to have a hearing, a contempt hearing, early next week. The judge has got to stop this. He is going to make a mockery of the case. He is going to intimidate jurors. And what's more, he is defying the very purpose of the entire proceeding, which is to demonstrate Donald Trump is no different than anyone else. He doesn't have the right to intimidate the court, the jurors, anyone else, and he's got to play by the same rules that everyone else does. Now, that said, I think the more he does this, the worse it gets for him. When he shows disdain in the courtroom, when he falls asleep, when he lashes out at people, when he grumbles under his breath, the jurors going forward are going to see this, and they are going to get the idea that this guy is a jerk. And what's more, this is exactly what he was accused of. He's a bully who will not accept the rules that apply to everyone else. That's why he breaks the law. That's why he lies. That's why he covers up. And I think the jurors are smart enough to get this. Listen, it's a pretty educated jury that they have drawn. A couple lawyers, people who are professional, IT execs, and the like. These people are not dumb. They may be relatively apolitical, but they're not dumb. And they will make the connection because everyone makes a connection in their real life. They observe someone's behavior and they infer from that motive, character. That's what's going to happen to Donald Trump. And that's the beauty of the justice system and the jury by your peers. That's what Donald Trump deserves. That's what he's going to get. And I strongly believe it's not going to go well for him. Now, there has been some debate as to whether this is an election interference case or a hush money case. And realistically, I think we have to say, yes, it's both. Because on one hand, this was the first attempt that Donald Trump made to lie to voters, to cover it up so that he could get into office. Clearly, he was trying to manipulate the political system. On the other hand, this is just sleazy Donald Trump acting like a mob boss, paying hush money, covering up affairs, deciding that maybe he wouldn't have to pay these women after he got elected, and then being told, no, you really have to pay your hush money after all. This is quintessential Donald Trump sleaze. And although he's not being tried for sleaze, remember the larger audience out there. And there are a lot of people, just like these jurors, who are very apolitical, who have not been paying attention to the news. And getting the reminder of what kind of person he is, how he treats women, how he treats everyone else, how he treats the jury, I think will be a rude awakening for those people whose memory has faded with time. So that's Donald Trump. Meanwhile, in the House, It has taken since October for the House to finally move to pass aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. They took a vote on the rules, which is sort of a precursor of the vote on the merits, today on Friday, and it passed overwhelmingly, over 300 votes. So why were they delaying so long? And the answer is because Mike Johnson is a spineless pawn of Donald Trump and the extreme right wing. When it all came down to it, over 300 votes in favor, they could have taken this a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and you roll it back all the way to October. And he should get no credit for this. There are all sorts of people falling all over themselves saying, oh, well, he came around to the good decision. It was a brave decision. No. First of all, this was his job, and his job is to look to the national security of the United States. So playing ball with a bunch of bullies for this long was outrageous. And second of all, look at the damage they have done. Think of the Ukrainians who have died because we did not supply adequate material. We did not give them sufficient ammunition. Think of the apartment buildings that were bombed, the territory that was lost, the cities that had to be ceded back to the Russians. This is an outrage that they facilitated this, and most important, that they diminished the United States in the eyes of the world. It took us this long to come to the aid of an ally. What do you think other allies must be thinking? Oh, gosh, I don't know if I could rely on the United States. You have to hang on for forever before the Congress is going to help you out. So this is not a celebratory event. It's a breather and a relief, frankly, that we haven't completely abandoned Ukraine. But this was an outrage. And voters should remember that when the chips are down, the Republican Party, it's the proverbial tail wagging the dog. The right-wing lunatics led by Donald Trump will push these people to the very brink of disaster, and if they have a choice, beyond the brink of disaster. So let's not celebrate no ticker tape parades for Mike Johnson. At least they got it done. I'll grant them that. Last issue, Israel. You remember when we talked previously that the Iranians had unleashed a barrage of missiles on Israel. Unprecedented in many ways, outrageous in many ways. But what happened then? President Biden, who has been derided for being too pro-Israel or not pro-Israel enough, depending upon your position, prevailed on the Israelis. We understand you have to respond. We get that. But this should not escalate into a regional war, which, by the way, could go nuclear, by overdoing the response. And a lot of conservatives objected. No, you have to back Israel to the hilt. They have to be able to do whatever they want. Actually not. That would not have been the best choice. And sure enough, the Israelis took the advice. They launched a very limited strike in one area at one base, from what we know, and the Iranians essentially ignored it. That's their way of saying, okay, we're done. I know it doesn't seem like a diplomatic triumph when things like that happen, but that's exactly what it was, because the president prevented an escalatory war, and moreover, he reestablished his influence with the Israelis. They didn't cross him on this. They didn't go with the right-wing members of their coalition and fire an all-out barrage. They didn't attack all the nuclear sites in Iran, as some people were talking. So the president does have influence. And moreover, it seems like all of the conversations about Rafah, which the Israelis have been threatening to attack and clean out the remainder of the Hamas fighters, have been going pretty well. That the Israelis are going to remove the civilians from the area so they can conduct whatever operations. It's going to be a much more surgical, hopefully less casualties than they had originally envisioned. Again, President Biden has the ability to exercise influence. Being a good friend of Israel does not mean cheerleading for their worst instincts. It does not mean encouraging Bibi Netanyahu. It means that you look both to our short and long-term interests and their short-term and long-term interests. And Israel cannot become a pariah on the world stage. It's already the victim of extreme criticism, of double standards. But they have to be a responsible member of the Western coalition and the international community. Yes, they were attacked brutally, but they still have to conduct themselves in a responsible way. That's the burden of being a democracy. That's the burden of being a decent society. And at times they have failed. The refusal or the inability to deconflict, to avoid the casualties that have been created against the aid workers has been really somewhat inexcusable. The number of civilian casualties, I think you can make a pretty good argument, has been excessive. But when the chips are down, when the president weighs in and says, you must increase aid or we're going to revise our position on the war. You cannot have an escalatory response. You cannot wipe out civilians in Rafah. They do listen. And that's the sign of a healthy give and take, a good relationship in which Israel does respect the United States, does take our advice, and in the long term will be the better for it. Now I'm going to conclude with one development, and that is college campuses. If you were following the news this week, you know that the president of Columbia University trooped up to the Hill, like the other presidents have done, to be grilled upon the issue of anti-Israel demonstrations, pro-Hamas demonstrations, however you want to call it, really anti-Semitism on campus. She did a pretty good job. She at least conceded that threatening genocide is anti-Semitic. That's a good start. She also made clear that they are pursuing disciplinary measures against students who commit acts of vandalism, who interfere with other students' education. They're even beginning to crack down on some of the non-tenured faculty. Well, that's a good move. Now, they are also, and this is true in two other colleges that I'm aware of, Pomona College and also Vanderbilt University, are beginning to clear out these encampments, these mass protests. They are moving towards a zero tolerance for vandalism, for refusal to identify themselves, for occupying areas they cannot and they should not. And now, once again, the students are squawking. What do you mean we get suspended when we occupy an office? What do you mean we have to take down our tents that we've put up against university policy? Well, welcome to the grown-up world. I think this is the healthiest development we have yet seen in academia in years. It's the reassertion of adult supervision. It is a refusal to allow the inmates to run the prison. And it is a reminder to these students that, yes, you have rights, but part of being a grown-up is exercising them responsibly. So 2 cheers for Columbia. I'll give 3 to Pomona, which not only called the police, but automatically suspended a bunch of students, and to Vanderbilt. It's not a question of smothering First Amendment speech. It's a question of demanding a level of civility, a level of respect on a college campus, because that's what they're supposed to be teaching. They're supposed to be teaching people how to behave in a diverse, pluralistic, democratic society. And this is a good start. So good for them. So keep the faith. Make sure you vote. Make sure you have your loved ones vote. Make sure you volunteer time if you are able, and money if you are able, to causes in support of democracy, because it's an all hands on deck moment. Bye-bye.